In this video, we will define the deterministic effects of radiation. We will also analyze the dose thresholds and the resulting early effects of whole body, partial body, and gonadal exposures of ionizing radiation. When we discuss early effects of radiation, we are mostly talking about deterministic effects of radiation. Deterministic effects are considered certain to occur, meaning that the effects are very likely to occur after a certain threshold has been met. Severity of early effects of radiation are related to the dose of the ionizing radiation the individual has been exposed to. Because of this, a graph of early effects follows a nonlinear threshold response curve that we will look at more closely later in this video. You should also be aware that deterministic effects are sometimes referred to as non-stochastic effects. We will first discuss whole body dose effects that occur shortly after exposure. Early effects occur in the hours, days, and weeks after an acute dose of radiation exposure. Most early effects involve somatic cells, which are those making up the individual and exclude reproductive cells. You should be aware that most of the responses we discuss are unlikely to occur as the result of diagnostic imaging procedures and are typically only seen in nuclear warfare or nuclear power plant accidents. As you might have guessed, this is because in imaging, we are typically only imaging or exposing a portion of the body to ionizing radiation. Nonetheless, it is important to understand the total body effects of radiation because deterministic effects can occur from complicated procedures using extended fluoroscopy, such as with interventional radiography and cardiac procedures. Another point worth mentioning is that the whole body doses we will be discussing are based on an acute one-time dose and are not protracted or fractionated. 90% of the damage occurring to somatic cells will repair itself over time. The remaining 10% is cumulative. As I mentioned a few moments ago, deterministic or early effects of radiation are seen after a threshold is met. For whole body radiation, the threshold for an early effect to be observed is 5 rem or 0.05 sieverts. At this dose, chromosomal aberrations or mutations are seen. At 25 rem or 0.025 sieverts, a decrease in blood cell count is experienced in the individual. This includes both white and red blood cells. An interesting fact is that early radiation workers had their blood checked weekly to ensure excessive exposures weren't being received. This was determined by their blood count. At 50 rem, or 0.5 sieverts, 50% of the individual's lymphocytes would be killed off. This places that individual in danger of infection, as the whole body would have difficulty fighting off illness. At 100 rem, or 1 sievert, individuals begin to die as a result of radiation. This is only in the weakest individuals of the population, as most will survive until higher doses are reached. In fact, only half of the population would perish after 350 to 400 rem, or 3.5 to 4 sieverts. The human lethal dose, where 50% of the population succumbs to radiation death after 30 days, is referred to as the human LD 50-30. 50 is the percent population that will die, and 30 is the number of days in which those exposed will die as a result of their exposure. 600 to 700 rem, or 6 to 7 sieverts, is the threshold that the population will not be able to survive. At 600 rem, the population will die without medical intervention, and at 700 rem, even with medical intervention, the outlook is grim. However, there is a person on record as having survived 850 rem, but this example is an anomaly. In this nonlinear graph, we can see deaths resulting from radiation exposure. We can tell that deaths begin at 100 rem and only affect a small percentage of the population. As stated earlier, this would be the weakest individuals of that population. As the dose increases, we see a response in the population with an increased percentage dying as a result of the radiation exposure. As the dose reaches 600 to 700 rem, 100% of the population will perish as a result of the amount of exposure. We can also see the lethal dose of 50% of the population dying within 30 days of the exposure falls around 350 rem. Notice the sigmoidal shape of the graph and that it does have a threshold of 100 rem. That is why we refer to this response graph as a nonlinear threshold graph. As technologists, The partial body dose thresholds tend to be more applicable since these are the thresholds our patients may encounter. As stated earlier, due to collimation and procedural focus, whole body effects are not realistic for our patients, but partial body doses that reach thresholds where effects are seen, while not common, are a possibility. The first dose threshold is review. As we stated earlier, chromosomal aberrations are seen at 5 rem or 0.05 sieverts. This can occur with total body and partial body exposures. At 200 rem or 2 sieverts, skin reddening can be seen. This is called skin erythema and typically develops hours to weeks after the radiation exposure. On average, erythema presents within a day or two after exposure and is similar in appearance and feeling to a sunburn. With higher doses, this initial erythema sometimes goes away only to return again in a week or two. This is often the start of moist desquamation, where the skin develops an open wound that weeps. This typically happens when doses reach 3,000 to 4,000 rem or 30 to 40 gray. Ulcerations and other complications can result from these complex skin wounds. At 300 rem or 3 sieverts, and often in conjunction with skin erythema, is temporary epilation or hair loss. Permanent hair loss is experienced around 700 rem or 7 sieverts. All three of these partial body doses are a possible complication for patients having extended fluoroscopy exams or radiation treatments. When we discuss partial body doses, the gonads fall into that category, and next I would like to review the effects of gonadal dose and the associated thresholds. With a radiation dose of 10 rem or 0.01 sieverts to the gonads, we see early effects in both males and females. For males, the sperm count decreases a few weeks after exposure. This is because the spermatozoa are sensitive to radiation, and many will be killed off as a result of the radiation exposure. This means they will not form into the more radio-resistant sperm. For females, at that same dose of radiation exposure to the gonads, menstruation can be delayed. For both male and females, a dose of 10 rem to the gonads results in only a temporary response. However, at 200 rem or 2 sieverts, the effects are more severe and can result in temporary fertility issues for both males and females receiving this level of exposure to their gonads. At 500 rem or 5 sieverts, both males and females begin to experience permanent sterilization. You should note that we are only discussing early effects of radiation in this video, and additional late effects can result from the irradiation of gamete cells, but that will be discussed in a separate video. Another point worth mentioning while we are on the topic of partial body effects is that dose to an entire organ can result in atrophy of that organ, or at high enough doses can result in organ failure. For example, with a large enough dosage to a kidney, it could experience atrophy or cease to function. This is the result of too many cells dying within the organ to repair itself. In the next video, we will continue to discuss the early effects of radiation related to acute radiation syndrome.